This week on Diabetes Connections, disability rights, particularly those spelled out in 504 plans, are being questioned right now in a way we haven't seen since the federal Americans with Disabilities Act was signed into law in 1990. There's a lot of uncertainty, but there are some things you can do to protect your children. We're going to talk about 504 plans. We'll go over the basics, talk about the lawsuits, the Department of Education situation, and much more. This podcast is not intended as medical advice. If you have those kinds of questions, please contact your healthcare provider. Welcome to another week of the show. I am always so glad to have you here. You know we aim to educate and inspire about diabetes with a focus on people who use insulin. My son was diagnosed with type 1 more than 18 years ago, just before he turned 2. My husband lives with type 2 diabetes. I don't have any type of diabetes, but I have a background in broadcasting, and that's why we started the podcast 10 years ago. Before we jump into this week's interview, I just want to make sure you know we put out a bonus episode a couple of days ago. The ATTD conference is going on. There's a lot of technology news coming out of that. Tandem Diabetes announced their software update for Control-IQ. It is now called Control-IQ Plus. And we were able to do a deep dive with Tandem about that software and a lot of other questions that you had. So I hope you got a chance to listen to that episode. If not, just you can find it in wherever you're listening to this one. If you're on the homepage, just check out recent episodes. There's a tab for that, or whatever podcast app you're listening to. Just go back one episode. Much more coming out of ATTD, and we will bring you more interviews and stories over the next few weeks. But I really wanted to talk about this subject. Federal protections, 504 plans. I'm getting a lot of emails. This is a big point of discussion and worry on social media. What is going to happen to our kids' 504 plans and disability protections? Between a lawsuit brought by 17 state attorneys general and the controversy around the Federal Department of Education, there is so much uncertainty here. Now, I do have to give a quick disclaimer. One of the limitations about podcasting is that breaking news can be very difficult. We taped this episode in early March, and as I'm getting ready to air it, changes to the Department of Education are still very much up in the air, but it does look like an executive order may have already been given, as you're listening, to try to dissolve the whole department. What that will mean on a practical level, on a local level, is honestly still very much unknown. So what we're trying to do in this episode is not react to headlines and speculation, but to give you a better baseline of information and to let you know what the American Diabetes Association is doing and what you can do. So I can tell you that a 504 plan is a plan developed to ensure that a child who has a disability receives accommodations that will ensure their academic success and access to the learning environment. It's called that because it is spelled out in Section 504 of the Federal Rehabilitation Act, which is part of the Americans with Disabilities Act. To talk about this, I am joined by Crystal Woodward. She's the managing director of ADA's Legal Advocacy Division. We've talked a lot over the years about the ADA Safe at School program, which I will link up. You will hear her talk about a lot of information and links. Those are going to be in the show notes. There is so much information that the ADA provides. If you have never done a deep dive, especially into their Safe at School program, it's really helpful and it gets state specific. Crystal is also the mother of a child with type 1. Her daughter was diagnosed as a baby more than 30 years ago. You know, we have a lot of new listeners and there are always new diagnoses. So we spend a lot of this interview going over the basics of a 504 plan. I think this is really important information that you don't always get. Sometimes the school just gives you a piece of paper or a computer printout. So we're going to talk about public, private, preschool, religious school. We talk about the common challenges. We talk about the cell phone bans that are going to affect in different states. But if you are already familiar with all of that, I can tell you that we start talking about the current federal issues about 20 minutes into this interview. My conversation with Crystal Woodward right after this. When you're deciding on a brand of insulin pump, there are a lot of things to think about, especially if you've never used a pump before. It can seem overwhelming. There are a lot of choices, and you want to make the right decision. That's why I'm so excited to tell you about Omnipod 5. Curious about trying an insulin pump or seeing what life without tubes is all about? Unlike traditional tubed pumps, you can try Omnipod without being locked into a 4-year contract. You might even be eligible for a free trial. Go to diabetes-connections.com and click on the Omnipod logo for full safety risk information and free trial terms and conditions. Also visit omnipod.com/diabetesconnections. Crystal Woodward, welcome back to Diabetes Connections. It is always great to talk with you. Thanks for spending some time with me today.
Thanks so much, Stacy, for this opportunity to talk about this important area of safe at school and making sure students with diabetes have appropriate access to diabetes care while in the school setting. Yes,
100%.
absolutely.
I know you do a lot more than safe at school. That's what we're going to be talking about today. But would you mind, before we go into more detail, what are the basics of a 504 plan? When we say that, what are we talking about?
Absolutely. Well, first, let me just give you some background about the law, Section 504 of the Rehabilitation Act of 1973. Section 504 does is it prohibits discrimination against people with diabetes, which is a disability under the Americans with Disabilities Act. What the ADA recommends is that under this law, that students with diabetes who are eligible, and what I mean by eligible, because it's not a slam dunk, mainly because kids who attend religious schools are not eligible for those protections under 504 unless that religious school receives federal funds, right? So what we recommend is that every parent identify who at their child's school is responsible for developing a 504 plan. So many times this is a school principal. It could be the school guidance counselor. There could actually be someone at the school or within the school district whose job it is to do nothing else but to administer Section 504 and IDEA and the Americans with Disabilities Act. So identify this person. Do this at the beginning of the school year or when your child is newly diagnosed. We want to make sure a 504 plan is in place for every student with diabetes. And what the 504 plan does, it lays out what services and accommodations the school is going to provide to meet its obligations under Section 504. What diabetes care is going to be provided, who is going to provide that care, how we're going to ensure that every student with diabetes has access to every school-sponsored program. Once the parent reaches out to the 504 coordinator or the designated 504 coordinator, and let me just back up to say, in many situations, it may be the school who reaches out to the parent and says, hey, did you know about Section 504? What do you think about developing a 504 plan for your child? So in many instances, that happens too. But more than likely, it's the parent who is being proactive. We want our parents to be proactive. We don't want to wait until an issue arises at school and then pull the team together to create the 504 plan. We want to be proactive and do it, especially while everything's going well. So what will happen is the 504 team will convene and they will do an individual assessment of each child and that child's needs. The 504 team usually consists of the parent, of course, a school nurse, a school guidance counselor, the 504 coordinator, and other school staff members or consultants who have knowledge about the student and how the student's diabetes impacts the student. And then the 504 team will consider two questions. One, does the student have a disability that substantially limits a major life activity? Because that is the definition of disability. So first, it needs to be determined whether or not the student has a disability. So we know that diabetes is a disability that substantially limits endocrine function. And then, does this substantial limitation of the major life activity, such as endocrine function, how does it impact the child's ability to function and to achieve academic success and to grow at school?
Can I interrupt real quick? Yeah, because it's interesting when you said those first 2 points. So the first one is a no-brainer. If you have type 1 diabetes, the answer to that question is check the box, yes, no questions asked, always.
Yes.
Okay.
Yes, that's always. Assuming the child is enrolled in a school having legal obligations.
Yeah, we're going to talk more about private schools, preschools a little bit later on. But right.
So we have, assuming that's what we're talking about here.
But the second question, because we know that every person with diabetes is a little different. That's the one that may be different person to person. Am I hearing you correctly?
Well, the major life activity is a substantial limitation of endocrine function,
Right.
right? But there are other major life activities that are impacted. The ability to walk, the ability to eat, the ability sometimes to learn, although learning need not be the major life activity that's impacted in order for a student to qualify for services under 504. There are many major life activities adversely impacted by diabetes. But we want the team to discuss those limitations. And then from that conversation, we're able to determine what accommodations are needed. Is the child independent? Is there a need for a school nurse or trained non-clinical staff to help with the insulin pump or to help monitor blood glucose or provide overall assistance or supervision to the student? Or is the student someone who's had diabetes for a long time, or an older student who is very capable and very independent in providing that self-management and maybe just needs to know that trained personnel are around to provide help in the event of a hypoglycemic emergency, right?
And we should point out that 504 plans can be changed and are expected to be changed, if not every year, then on a regular basis.
Yeah,
As the child
so
gets old.
the American Diabetes Association recommends that the 504 plan be updated at the beginning of every school year. And actually, my own personal advice is to update the plan for the next school year in the current school year. So come May or June, as a parent, if the 504 coordinator hasn't reached out, I, as a parent, would reach out to the school and ask that the team convene and that we develop the plan for next year. And granted, some things may happen over the summer. Maybe the student becomes more independent in a particular diabetes care task, and that can all be changed. And then as our students mature and progress and become more confident in their diabetes management, independence is certainly one aspect of the diabetes care task that we want to look at every school year. So we want to renew it every year. And then for parents of those newly diagnosed students, Stacy, you and I know how overwhelming that is. I mean, my world was completely turned upside down when my 1-year-old daughter was diagnosed with type 1. Just lots to think about, lots to do, but don't forget about that school piece because our children spend most of their waking day at school. So it's critical that they get appropriate diabetes care at school.
Yeah.
And it may not be quite the same as what a parent might provide at home, but we do want to make sure that care is provided in accordance with the child's diabetes medical management plan or provider's orders.
So let's talk about that because where I live, in Charlotte, North Carolina school system, big public school system, you mentioned it just now, diabetes medical management plan.
Yes.
What my friends were telling me, because Benny was diagnosed at 2, right? So we had a little while before he went to school. But what my friends who lived around the country were telling me I needed in a 504 plan, most of that was actually covered in the DMMP that the Charlotte Mecklenburg school system provided us with.
That's excellent.
So what CMS does here is that the DMMP is all about dosing, treatment, glucagon, activity, ketones, that kind of stuff is all the DMMP. The 504 is really only used for testing situations. So my question is, if you have a plan like that, it's fantastic. We're really lucky that they spell it all out like that. We don't have full-time school nurses, but that's another story. What about for parents who aren't given a DMMP form, who have to put everything in a 504 plan? How does that work? Is that more common?
Okay. Actually, most students with diabetes do have either a diabetes medical management plan. And as you know, the ADA, we have our own template plan, which is very comprehensive and has been adopted by several states as the standard DMMP. But without a DMMP, the provider can write orders, and those orders need to be adhered to. So not every student, although we'd like for every student to have a DMMP, to make that student as safe and secure as possible. And when the kids are safe and secure, that means that they can fully participate and have full access to all school-sponsored activities, right? It's okay to have a healthcare plan that is written and approved by the child's own diabetes provider. Doesn't matter that's not a DMMP, even though that's best practice. That's okay. Because as you know, the DMMP is very different from the 504 plan. The 504 plan is going to implement the DMMP. In fact, I recommend that the 504 team incorporate by reference the DMMP or the provider's order. So it's okay not to have that form, even though that's best practice. It might be the provider has their own form. It might be the school district has their own form. As long as the essentials are covered in that form, it's okay. That form or those providers' orders are critical because without it, the schools cannot provide care. So the schools do need to have the orders from the child's provider in order to be able to, under their nurse practice licensing, to provide that care. So that's absolutely critical. And that sounds so easy, but we do know that that's problematic for some families. Some families, it's really hard. And we have wonderful school nurses out there, absolutely going above and beyond. They want to take care of these kids with diabetes. I talk to them, several times a week. I'm contacted by school nurses. I belong to several state-level school working groups consisting mostly of school nurses. So I interface a lot with school nurses. They are passionate. They're committed to getting the training they need to keep up with ever-evolving diabetes technology and treatments. So they'll go above and beyond. If they're having trouble with the parent bringing the DMMP or their provider's orders, the school nurse will reach out to the provider and do their best to get that order signed, sealed, and delivered so that appropriate care can be provided to that child with diabetes. And whether that child has type 1 diabetes or type 2 diabetes, because let's face it, a lot more children now do have type 2 diabetes. So we want to make sure we have orders in place for all of those kids.
I have a few more questions about 504s. Let me jump back to, we mentioned religious schools who do not receive federal funding are not required to follow this. What about private schools? And what about preschools? Right back to our conversation. But first, Diabetes Connections is brought to you by Dexcom. When you're deciding on a brand of insulin pump, there are a lot of things to think about, especially if you've never used a pump before. It can seem overwhelming. There are a lot of choices, and you want to make the right decision. That's why I'm so excited to tell you about Omnipod 5. Curious about trying an insulin pump or seeing what life without tubes is all about? Unlike traditional tubed pumps, you can try Omnipod without being locked into a 4-year contract. You might even be eligible for a free trial. Go to diabetes-connections.com and click on the Omnipod logo for full safety risk information and free trial terms and conditions. Also visit omnipod.com/diabetesconnections.
Okay, so preschools and private schools are places of public accommodation. So they are required. The religious schools under Section 504, the religious schools don't have obligations under the Americans with Disabilities Act, but they do have obligations to provide services under 504 if they receive federal funding.
Got it.
Well, let me just say this. Even for those religious operated schools not receiving federal funding, my experience has been that most of them have an anti-discrimination policy. It's a published anti-discrimination policy. So if a child is enrolled in a religious operated school not receiving federal funding, I recommend that the parents investigate the anti-discrimination policy and use it as a negotiating tool to secure needed care and accommodations for their child. And those policies can be found online and annual reports. Shouldn't be too difficult to find the anti-discrimination policy.
Yeah, unfortunately, I will tell you, and I'm sure you've heard these stories all the time, we have a church, and a very large church here in Charlotte with a school that doesn't matter what the disability is. They won't take the kids. They're just, sorry, doesn't matter. It's not just diabetes, but it is so unfortunate. It's so sad. But I have not heard that. So I will follow up in my local group and see if there is maybe. I doubt it because I think the lawyer.
I doubt it. Yeah. I mean, but I'm sure they have an anti-discrimination policy. I feel confident about that. So I
will look into
recommend that be explored. to see
Okay.
if that's the case. But your preschools and camps and communities, summer recreation programs, they don't fall under 504.
Right.
They would fall under Title III of the Americans with Disabilities Act, and they still have legal obligations to provide that care to the child with diabetes, our summer camps, our community soccer league. And what that translates to is that a coach or a group leader, activity leader needs to be trained by the coordinator, by the owner of that activity to provide needed care to that child. The YMCA, for example, okay, they run a lot of camps, a lot of after school programs. So those programs are required to provide care to children with diabetes. And enrollment cannot be refused unless, as you just mentioned, you had a preschool situation operated by a religious entity and they were refusing enrollment. So, of course, we need to look into that a little bit further to see what the situation is there. And I will plug this later, but the American Diabetes Association, our legal advocacy team, we provide a free service where parents, families, anyone who's been discriminated against because of their diabetes, they can call us at 1-800-DIABETES or email us at askada@diabetes.org to ask for guidance and information to assist them in their particular advocacy to fix a discrimination issue. So we have that free service.
That's great.
Have had it for years. And any given month, we probably get 100 requests for help with all kinds of discrimination matters. And of course, in the back to school time, July, August, September, we get hundreds of requests for help from parents of students with diabetes. Either they want information about developing a 504 plan or an issue has arisen and they're having trouble negotiating the resolution of that issue with their school. So just know that we have that free service.
Ask you, I don't know if you can answer this, Crystal, and it's fine if you can't. Can I ask you, what have you not been able to resolve? What happens real world? I imagine like a family would just get fed up and say, you know what, we're not wanted here. We may be right, but it's not worth it? Or are there other, I don't want to
Well,
put words in your mouth.
there are other routes. I mean, my mantra is always educate, negotiate, litigate, legislate, right? When kids aren't getting the care and accommodations they need, it's usually because of the lack of education on the part of the school about diabetes, and certainly a lack of knowledge and education about the school's legal obligations to provide that care. And as you know, the ADA has a wealth of materials that the parents can use to educate the educators, so to speak. So that's the first line of defense, educate, negotiate. I will give a couple examples. First of all, let me just say that I've been doing this for almost 3 decades. I've been on staff and leading the charge here for Safe at School since, my goodness, 1998. See my gray hair? No, it's a true passion of mine to be able to help these families. But the issues that arrive are different. When I first started, I think the most concerning and most frequently heard issue was a school's refusal to allow a student to check their blood glucose in the classroom.
Wow.
Okay, so that was a big issue. Another big issue that we rarely hear about anymore is training non-clinical school staff to administer glucagon. Those have almost disappeared. I mean, every once in a while we'll hear about an issue with glucagon because there's still a couple states that do not permit trained non-clinical school staff to give glucagon or to check blood sugar. So, we still hear from parents from those states. But today the issues, and again, it just seems like there's a curve. We hear about this problem, we work to educate, and parents take this information and we share the information with the schools or the school superintendents, and the problem gradually, I don't want to say it goes away, but it becomes less problematic. And I'm going to give you remote monitoring of CGM as an example, okay? We know that it is mutually beneficial, both for the student and the school, to use remote monitoring. I'm a huge proponent of that. However, I know there were some obstacles initially. And I feel like as the school nurses have received more education about the benefits of remote monitoring and can see really how easy it is.
And you mean remote monitoring within the school. You're not talking about allowing a parent to monitor. You're
No,
talking about within the
I'm
school.
talking about the
Yeah.
school nurse or the school staff remote monitoring. It's slowly becoming the norm.
Yeah.
And I'll give an example. So my kid's former school district, Loudoun County, Virginia, which is kind of where this Safe at School started, they heard from parents loud and clear, and they have created a policy enabling school staff to do remote monitoring. And I think we're going to see this in more and more school districts as we go along. I don't want to say it's not still an issue or concern, but I really think that we're going to hear about that less as the school nurses in the schools are better understanding the benefits of remote monitoring.
Yeah. What are some common 504 accommodations? Like, what are the most common accommodations that you see?
So the most accommodations the ADA recommends to be included in a student's 504 plan is access to trained personnel at all times, whether that's a school nurse or whether that's non-clinical staff who have been trained to meet the needs of the individual student with diabetes. And a lot of that, as I talked about earlier, is based on the student's level of independence. But we do want to make sure that there is a school employee available at all times. And that includes after-school activities, field trips, sports, school dances, any kind of activity that is sponsored by the school. Also, everyone is well aware of the cell phone restriction bans, or the cell phone restrictions, not all of them are bans, that are being passed by the state.
Yeah, I was going to ask you about that.
Yeah.
Very hot topic.
Yes, it is a hot topic. What you will see, and I'm proud of ADA for leading the charge, what you will see in those statutes is an exception for the student to access their smart device to manage medical conditions. Okay, so that's in there. But even with that said, another recommendation, and ADA has just updated its template section 504 plan to reflect this, but we recommend that access to smartphone, smart devices be included in the child's 504 plan.
Just to clarify, Crystal, I'm so sorry. So I get that you want it in the 504 plan, but when you said you've got it in the statute, this isn't a federal statute, right? It's state by state
these
by
are
state.
state by
Is
state.
it in all the states?
No, but again, if you go to ADA's website, we have information about the states who have passed and implemented such statutes, and in the case, it's regulation. In some cases, it's the larger school districts.
Got it.
Who now have developed this policy. But if you go to diabetes.org/safe at school and you click on the button that says legal protections and you scroll to the bottom of that page, there is a wealth of information about state-specific statutes and regulations. And there's also a one-pager there advising parents what to do about that and to make sure they write it into their child's 504 plan that their child can have access to their cell phone. It's so important, so important. Also, we want to make sure that our kids aren't penalized for absences, for medical appointments, for illness, because many of these kids do have more absences than their peers. So we want to make sure there's no penalty. We want to make sure that these children have the ability to take an exam at another time. If blood glucose levels are low or high, we want to make sure that they are optimally positioned to do well on their exams. So it might be that you take a test at another time. Again, we have an updated template plan available at diabetes.org/504 plan. It's free. Take a look at it. You can download it. There's a PDF of it. There's a Word document. You can take it and fill it in, print it out, whatever works for the family.
Okay. So I know a lot of parents listening were hoping I would start with this, but I feel like we needed to establish for new parents, for new folks, what a 504 plan is and all the basics and the common, ins and outs.
Mm-hmm.
But 504 plans are under assault right now. There's 17 states, attorneys general suing to declare it unconstitutional. Can you tell us a little bit about where the ADA stands on this and what you folks are doing?
Okay. I want to talk about two recent actions that impact or may impact Section 504. First, the lawsuit you talk about, the Texas lawsuit. That lawsuit has been put on pause. Okay, so for right now, we don't need to worry about that. It's on pause. ADA is monitoring it, and we will take appropriate action as and when necessary.
Got it.
What we're a little worried about, quite frankly, is the attempt to
the Department of Education. This is the next
Department of
question.
Education. Yeah. Yes. But just know we are monitoring those developments as well. The law has not changed. The law has not changed. And the funding for that law has not changed. Okay. Nothing has changed. We're really sorry to see the staff cuts. We are worried about the impact of those cuts upon children with diabetes. But for now, our recommendation is to make sure your child has that 504 plan. And if your child does have a 504 plan, make sure it's up to date. I can also share with you that the ADA has sent a letter to Department of Education Secretary McMahon outlining our concerns and also the importance of preserving Section 504, its importance to students with disabilities, its importance to students with diabetes. So we are monitoring, we're on it. Again, we're really sorry this is happening. We are concerned, but to stay tuned and just know that the ADA is looking out for students with diabetes and their families. And we're going to do everything we can to make sure that Section 504 continues.
Other than checking our own plans, making sure everything's okay, is there anything that people can do? I mean, is this a call your congressman moment? What can we do?
Absolutely. I always say call your member of Congress, even your state legislators. Just alert them, let them know how you feel. Very important to stay in touch with your members of Congress. Also, moving away from the political landscape, I would say also if a problem arises with your child's access to diabetes care, we want you to contact us. First of all, we want to be able to provide you with help. But at ADA, we also track trends, issue trends, geographic trends. That's how we decide how to allocate our resources. So it's important to hear from you. But also for parents, work your way up the chain of command. Talk to your school board. Talk to your school superintendents. Most of the states have a state school nurse health consultant at the State Department of Education or the State Department of Health level. Reach out to that consultant. And there's lots that you can do to try to resolve a problem.
I know you have so many resources. So
yes.
Do you have state by state? Does Save at School cover the state by state policies? Because I'm thinking
Absolutely.
This is also a place where parents could say, okay, I'm going to my state legislature or I'm going to my state superintendent of schools and saying, if the 504 federal goes away, what are you doing to protect my child today?
Yes. All the states have different laws, right? Every state has its own statutes, its own regulations, its own policies. But yes, ADA has all of this information in one place. In fact, we just updated this resource, maybe 6 weeks ago. So it is current. It contains the cell phone restriction statutes. It contains the undesignated glucagon statutes. Those are all coming down the pipe. Those are great things. But again, go to our legal protections page. There's a drop-down box, and you can click on your state and access the laws and regulations and policies that impact students and children with diabetes in your state. Absolutely.
That's great.
One thing that I would like to recommend is be proactive in developing your child's Section 504 plan. Try to avoid being reactive. We don't want to wait for that. We don't want to wait until an issue arises. Be proactive and put that 504 plan in place, even when especially when things are going well at school. Now is the time to do that because we do not know if that school principal who has that child with type 1 diabetes theirself, we don't know if that school principal is going to be around next week or the school nurse or the teacher who was trained last year. So my one golden nugget among several golden nuggets is put that 504 plan in place now, especially when things are going well. And ADA has resources to help you do that on its website. And you can also call us at 1-800-DIABETES.
That's great advice for sure. Crystal, before I let you go, You mentioned your daughter was diagnosed at 1. I know she's
Yeah.
in her 30s now. You've been at this for a long time. How is she doing?
Oh, thanks for asking, Stacey. She is doing wonderfully. She's an ICU critical care nurse at a Washington, D.C. suburban hospital. Loves her job, doing well with her diabetes. Of course, she wears CGM, has a pump, takes good care of her diabetes. She was married about 2 years ago and kind of have a funny story to tell about that because her husband is an absolute doll for many reasons. One being that he has a sharps needle phobia. But he is her rock and her support, and that sharps and needle phobia does not come into play at all when helping Devin to care for her diabetes.
Right.
So
That's
I
great.
call him my son-in-love.
Oh my gosh, that's amazing.
But no, she's doing great. And she's always been, never let diabetes get in her way. Never, ever. Our kids overcome a lot of challenges and a lot of stigma too, right?
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, but she's never let that get in the way. And, I'm proud of her. And I hope she's proud of herself.
Well, Crystal Woodward, thank you so much for joining me. Thanks for the great advice. I know we'll be talking again soon. I'd love to follow up and talk about legal stuff for adults with type 1 as well, because I know you have resources for that. So let's talk
Absolutely.
again soon. But thank you so much.
Thank you, Stacey. Take care, everybody.
Again, more information in the show notes. She gave out a lot of information there, but there is a real wealth of knowledge at the ADA website. I've linked all of that up. Just go to diabetes-connections.com and click on this episode's homepage. I'm not going to lie, I am worried about these federal protections. I think we have learned that a lot of states will not automatically extend them. Case in point, we see these attorneys general suing in different states. That lawsuit is on hold as we were taping, but I imagine it will not stay that way. So I don't say all that to be scary. I think it is a time to speak up. I think it's a time to call our representatives to let them know how important this is to us. I think if you have a very friendly school environment, as Crystal said, now is the time to reach out to them, to firm up your 504 plan, to talk about your concerns. I always said to our amazing school staff, you're great, but what happens when you leave? And they would say, oh, I'm never going anywhere. I would say, when you win Educator of the Year and then you're promoted, what happens? I need to protect my child. Just because we haven't had any issues yet doesn't mean that someone couldn't misunderstand. I mean, you can use all sorts of language if they need to hear stuff like that. I'm happy to help. If you have any questions, pop them in the Facebook group. There's a lot of uncertainty, as I said, is the nicest way to put it right now. But I really do think the community can help. We can help each other out. And when you need legal assistance, I'm telling you, the ADA really has incredible resources. Okay, and before we go, Mom's Night Out Minneapolis, coming up in September. Registration is open. The early bird special is on. The room block is open. So do not miss out. I'm so excited about this event registration. We opened and it's been amazing so far. Easily the quickest registration, biggest first wave that we've seen for any of these Mom's Night Out events. I really do think the word is getting out. I'm so excited. Our next event will be in Phoenix in October. Registration should open in early April for that. And then 2026, we'll be announcing those cities in just a couple of weeks. All right. Thank you to my editor, John Buchanan from Audio Editing Solutions. Thank you so much for listening. I'm Stacey Sims. I'll see you back here soon. Until then, be kind to yourself.
Diabetes Connections is a production of Stacey Sims Media. All rights reserved, all wrongs avenged.